Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Engaging Ideas, the Parsons TKO podcast, where we talk to leaders and luminaries in the mission-driven sector about their experiences to gather insights and ideas to increase our perspectives and understanding, and to always make sure you know, dear listener, that you are not alone and we are all in this together. Before we begin, please leave us a review if you can on whichever platform you choose to listen to us. We greatly appreciate your feedback. We'd love to hear how you are experiencing our show and what things you would like to hear more about on this podcast. And most importantly, thank you so much for listening. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Kathleen Heckman and Geoff Barttlet. They are both currently working at the University at Buffalo. Kathleen is serving as the Associate Vice President for Advancement Administration, and Geoff is serving as the Assistant Vice President for Strategic Initiatives. Welcome, y'all.
Welcome, Tony. Good to see you again.
Thank you. And as I mentioned to the both of you, this is my first time interviewing two guests at once. So I'm quite excited, and we'll see how I make out today. But before I dive in, one thing, I had met you all at the AASP conference in the fall in New Orleans. I listened to your talk about the roadmap y'all built, and we're going to dive into that today. But I think if you remember, I was clapping out loud at one of the things I had heard during it. There were two things that were just great that I wanted to quote. One was, in the future, all business strategy will be digital strategy. And my eruption of clapping came to, digital strategy is not a digital communication strategy. I was so thankful to hear that, because I find it does really get conflated very easily in the nonprofit space that, we have all these different tools we're using. So thank you all for sharing that publicly with the world. And as we get in, how did, just to get started, the context to set the stage for creating a digital roadmap at your university, how did that get going? Was there a deadline? What was the timing? Why did that come about?
Yeah, well, there really wasn't a deadline or a date that we had to have this plan in place, Tony. For us, and like many of our colleagues in higher education, we are continuing to face budget cuts, challenges hiring qualified staff, the expectation that we're going to do more with less, right? So we were contemplating as a division, as a leadership team, how we can manage through those realities, right? How do we rise to the occasion and meet that challenge of doing more with less? And digital became a really interesting opportunity for us to leverage so that we didn't have to keep cutting staff positions or to keep cutting back on essential programming and tools that we needed. And the idea of leveraging technology to do more and capitalize on that was really appealing to us. So it really just led us to this idea of how can we embrace this and really apply this to the work that we're doing in higher education when many weren't yet doing that, right? We were probably historically behind, maybe more of a slow adopter of technology. And the pandemic, frankly, I think forced us and gave us a great opportunity to embrace this a little more fully. We had to learn how to use Zoom technologies like we are, right, for this podcast. We had to orient and just be comfortable doing things in different ways. And so we capitalized on that and leverage that to also encourage our staff to think about the work that they were doing in different ways. So that was really the catalyst for this. And we took full advantage of circumstances that were presented to us and tried to make the best out of them.
We were also really fortunate, though, that our VP at the time has a real passion for digital and innovation. And so really challenged a group of us to think about how do we not just use it as a tool, but really think about digital as a core concept for our work, how we think about who we are and what we do. And that's as Kathleen said, the pandemic spurred it, but those conversations were happening in advance. It just allowed us to really move it to the forefront much more than what we had until then.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and one thing we always talk about too with groups is you got to have that internal champion somewhere at the executive level that's willing to say, no, this is important. I also thought, Kathleen, just what you were saying there, it was fascinating to me. Do more with less, and then you started on this path. I think for everyone listening, I hope they're taking notes on that, where this does become important to how you can figure out to hit that mandate that everybody asks about. And, so that's just interesting. I've never heard anyone come up with that perspective before. I mean, was that sort of a guiding principle in this, is we have to do more with less, we need to recruit in, but this road mapping of how we're going to do it becomes essential to figuring that out? Was that kind of
I would offer that was probably more of a lagging indicator. We sort of came to realize that, right? It certainly wasn't a driver, but I do think that we had collected, just as an aside, a pretty impressive deck of technology, and we were not utilizing that as effectively as we needed to. So I think we recognized that technology played a role, but came to realize how significant a role that would be as we got into this, and really thought about how we could apply the different tools and options that were available to us to our work. We are hoping, and we are starting to see, already, that by adopting this strategy and these principles, that we can elevate the staff that we have to do higher level strategic work, rather than to be grounded in the day-to-day minutia that has been dominating their time. So, for example, we have a constituent records team that is responsible for keeping our alumni and donor records up to date, right? Tracking addresses and deceasing individuals when they pass away. And they have over 1 million records in our database, right, that they felt responsible for. This has to be clean data. I'm responsible for this. And so we've been able to think about technology in terms of automation, right? If we can find a way to automate the deceasing of a record so that it deceases throughout the system, and then doesn't have to be deceased in every iteration throughout the system, right? That buys them time, right? So that they can then use that time on other higher level activities. So we're really excited about the future and the other gains that we achieve over time. But that's just an early example of things that we've started to realize will be byproducts of this adoption of technology as well.
I think it's important though too, because you kind of started to hit on this, Tony, where doing more with less doesn't necessarily mean it's less expensive, right? We're also finding that the technology can be really expensive, but as Kathleen says, what the trade-off is, or the balance is that we're able to do higher thinking, less transactional work, more strategic work, and letting the technology do some of that work for us. So it's that balance of, we're investing in this. It's not necessarily a direct cost savings to us all the time. But can we also then offload some other platforms? I think, what did we have at one point? 70 different platforms that we come up with. And that runs the gamut from, Adobe and Microsoft to our CRM and everything in between. But we were shocked when we went, that's a lot of technology that we have for one division. We're looking through this list and going, does anyone even know what that is? And the one I always love is Toad. What's Toad? It's something that our Oracle folks use. It's a great tool that they always use, and we're going, oh, okay, great. So at least someone knows what it is.
Yeah, all that shadow technology that you start to find when you dig into these projects is amazing. Even just thinking about, because technology is expensive. And then I think a lot of groups too that we deal with, they just forget about the maintenance costs once it's in place too. These are recurring costs that have to manage. I love the way you phrase it though, that it's freeing you up to do higher level thinking. I had a friend years ago, and he was like, where's the promise of, isn't technology supposed to make everything easier? I'm like, yeah, but think about what you're working on today and the things you didn't have to do because of the technology you put in place. Like it's there, it's just not doing everything for you. So just thinking about the complexity of your organization and where you'll sit within it, a lot of the organizations we work with at Parsons TKO have multiple departments and different stakeholders, and everyone's sort of on the same team, but pulling in different directions occasionally. So I'm curious, what did it look like with the departments and the staff roles that you had to pull together, and who had to be an informed stakeholder? What did that all look like to get this thing started?
Yeah, that's our reality too, right? We have a lot of opinions and perspectives that need to be heard and met. So we knew from the beginning that it had to be a representative work group of individuals who could broadly speak to the needs and the issues that our staff were dealing with. And so at the basic level, our team is all about engaging in fundraising. So, of course, those two functional areas were represented in our work group. but then we also tapped individual members of the units that support that forward-facing work. So someone from our communications team, someone from our IT team. We had budget and HR represented in those discussions. Just looking at my list here. Yeah, so really broad-based in nature. I would also say, Tony, that we tried to tap individuals from those functional areas that were not necessarily the leader, the person who was responsible for the outcomes and outputs, but really the person on the team that had the passion for this conversation, because it was a changing dynamic. And we recognized that not everyone on the team had the capacity or the enthusiasm that Geoff and I have for this topic. And it is really necessary, I think, to ensure that a project like this is launched and then sustained over the long term. And looking back, I would absolutely say that was the right decision to make, is to bring the right people at the table, not necessarily the right title to the table.
Ooh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I mean, passion matters a lot during these change initiatives, and you need champions that are going to go back and talk to their teams about it with excitement and enthusiasm, and the time it takes to do these. I don't know. I run a lot. Everyone always uses the sprint first marathon, but there really is something in that long-term effort. This isn't a 1 month project or a 6 month project. These things, when we do them, they're 6 months to 8 months to get to the roadmap, but the roadmap is for a 3-year plan.
Right.
It's
Geoff and I have cried a little bit about the fact that we will never reach the destination, right? That's one of our lessons learned, right? This is a journey. It's a marathon. It's not a destination, because it's ever changing, right? The technology landscape is growing and adopting new ways and new methodology. We have to be always doing the same if we're going to, drive the success we want to see. So we're excited about that, and yet it is a little hard at times to realize that, right? It will never be done.
Yeah, we always sort of push once you prioritize, your high fidelity is year 1, year 3 is low fidelity. And the whole technology suites might start to change by then, but at least you would know how it's connecting to that, or why it's trying to connect to that.
Right.
Also, just for anyone listening, I really like that you had mentioned you had folks in there who were from the budgeting team and HR. I have not seen that in a lot of organizations that we worked with, where they invited folks from those departments, but it seems pretty critical that as somebody from finance is starting to get an idea of what this is going to look like, and they're not just surprised at the end of it. That's
right.
Well, in HR too, and because as we'll get into in a little bit, one of our concepts is, staff build out, staff knowledge, right? And so you need to have that HR partner right at the beginning as well, to understand what it is that we're trying to do to build out those capacities and competences in the technology and the thinking as well, because it's not just technology. It's not just how do we use the technology. It's really a mindset that we're trying to build out along with the technology and the infrastructure and the policy. And so we're trying to really think of this in a much more holistic way than just these siloed approaches that we typically think about when it comes to technology.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I love it. I'm loving this conversation. I mean, that's just because capability is one thing, but when we use capacity, it's not just capacity and the amount of hours somebody could put on something, but having the skill set that can come in and work and sort of be within that system. And if you have to retrain, what is the HR function behind that type of training they're offering to folks?
And the curiosity behind maximizing the solution, right? We had a lot of users that would use the basic functionality of the product, and we recognized that we were probably underperforming. I guess that's the word to use. We were not capitalizing on the richness and the full spectrum of capability of any of our solutions, right? So, but that's part of someone's natural curiosity to learn and to grow and to challenge the system as much as they can. So that's part of it as well.
So I'm just, for people in the audience, I mean, it sounds like y'all have the curiosity and interest in this, but how, somebody might be listening, but like, how did this fall to them? Because sometimes it might just feel like a burden getting handed out within organizations. So yeah, how did y'all end up getting to be the people who had to take the lead on this?
Rod asked for volunteers, and everyone to take 2 steps forward, and everyone took 2 steps back. And Kathleen and I were standing there going, "Where'd everybody go?"
Is that really how it happened?
No.
Well.
No, I think that, Kathleen said she and I just naturally, I think, had a real interest in this. We like to think about the work that we do, how it affects the division. So there were a lot of natural handovers, and that just made sense in the two of us really kind of taking on the lead. I mean, it was more than the title, as she said, but the kind of the passion, the interest, the perspective, and frankly, the desire. And I think that we've had a lot of fun with this, and I think have had some really good conversations as well.
Was it the type of thing, though, that got put into your performance plans? And somebody, your supervisor say, this is going to happen this year, and I expect you to take the lead? Or was it something you suggested up to your supervisors?
Well, Rod, we both report to the vice president. I would just say that it was one of those, priority efforts for the division at large. And it just became part of the work that we were doing, not necessarily that formally. Tony, looking at my performance program, do you see a line in there that said, build the digital roadmap or drive this? No, it's not there. But by extension of the work that I do every day, the extension of the work that Geoff does every day, it's there, right? In essence, in philosophy, right? Part of my charge in my role is to drive the effectiveness and efficiency of the division at large, right? So I would definitely say that this discussion we're having today fits within that, right? We're, I guess, a little less formal in that regard, is that we still do things even if they're not in our programs, right? Because again, we buy into these ideas. We want to see what's in the best interest of the division succeed and flourish. And so Geoff and I think, are two members of the team that embrace that kind of notion. So we're kind of go along with it and do what we need to do, right, to succeed. So willingly, not with kicking feet, as he suggested.
I didn't say it was kicking feet. I just said that, sometimes you kind of go.
Yeah, and I think we're different enough. We're similar, but we're different enough that we also challenge each other to think differently, right? And our day-to-day responsibilities are also different enough. So, I tend to be more, I think, in the weeds with my team and managing the work and making sure that the resources and the people and the time is spent in the right way. And Geoff is able to do a lot of thinking and benchmarking and planning that I think is a really nice complement to that, right? And so together, I think we form a pretty good team that brings the elements that are so necessary to launch successful an endeavor of this nature.
Absolutely.
It's interesting just talking with both of you and the energy y'all have together and how you did this. And what we had talked about a little earlier, the energy and resilience it takes to go through sort of a major change project and to pull a lot of these pieces together. It seems to me a lot of times I'm working with groups and there's one champion who's in charge of it. So I feel like, how much did it help the both of you to have each other as partners in this?
Tremendously.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, our vice president is no longer with us. So if we had not set it up in this way, I'm not sure we would be here today, because Rod, our VP, was the champion when we kicked off, right? It sort of evolved. Geoff and I got on board. We took on more and more of the leadership and ownership, thankfully, right? Because Rod's not here. Our new VP is certainly interested in, continued growth, interim VP, growth and advancement, but doesn't have the same orientation to digital technology, AI, the types of things that we're wrestling with. And so I think that this easily could have gotten sort of put on the back burner had we not brought other people to the table and, sort of tasked them with ownership. So I'm thankful for that as well. In hindsight, you can see these things in why they're so valuable, more so than when they're actually occurring.
Oh yeah. We're often in the seat of talking to groups that have never done it before, and then trying to really explain that value that you're seeing as you finish it. Back on. But I know, so you had mentioned like getting other people involved, and one of the things y'all talked about in your presentation was the digital governance committee. And I think you talked a little bit about that a while ago, but how did that come together? Were you two tasked with finding those individuals, bringing them in, and then is there a mandate of the committee? Did it have authority? how did you manage communications with all those people? It's a lot of questions all in one.
Well, so yes, and yes, and Kathleen and I, and there again, the partnership in developing this, we spent a lot of time talking about, and imagining what this looks like and what would the charge be and who should be involved. But I think it's important to kind of set the stage of how it used to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
If someone had budget and they had an idea and they got enamored by a platform, they would go out and buy it, and then would bring it back and say, okay, IT, I've got this new platform, I need you to implement. And IT didn't necessarily have any say in it. They're trying to be good partners and would do the best that they could. But there wasn't implementation plans, there wasn't adoption plans, there wasn't evaluations of the tool. There was really no conversation even around how does this support our larger divisional goals and objectives. Is it a strategy or a tool that we really need to adopt for strategy? So we were missing a lot of really big important questions to answer before we went out and just suddenly we had platform A, and then a year later we're realizing, well, no one's using platform A. Gee, I wonder why. So the whole concept around the digital governance committee really was try to answer those big questions, to get those folks to ask the questions and answer them. And so we really start with our charge being, we're the body that's tasked with ensuring that any new purchase aligns with what we're trying to do as a division. So we ask, how does this support, the strategic plan or help us achieve our divisional goals? We ask about what's the implementation plan, who else needs to be part of the conversation in vetting the platforms, what's the adoption plan? That was, I think, a critical piece that we realized early on that we didn't have. And we had a lot of examples of platforms that sounded great and then no one did anything with them. And then also, as I said, the kind of that evaluation piece as well, getting our folks to think about ROI. What are the KPIs? What's the ROI? Why should we adopt this platform, especially if it's going to take up resources that could potentially be used somewhere else? And so again, it was just that, I don't want to say clearinghouse, that's not quite the right word, but that body that was really tasked to think about these things at a larger level. But it was also about what's happening outside the division, what's happening outside UB. What are the things that we should be thinking about? How, looking through all the platforms that we have, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense? Are we keeping track of these sorts of things? So it was also an opportunity for us to think about both internally what's happening, but then externally, are there platforms or concepts or ideas or programs that others are starting to adopt that we should be thinking about as well? And that's kind of that innovation piece of where's the industry going and how can we make sure that we're being responsive to it as well. So that was kind of the charge of the Digital Governance Committee. And like the initial group that came together, we really looked to find folks that could represent different perspectives in the division. So we have gift officers, we had IT staff, we had donor relations, we had communications, we had alumni engagement. Of course, Kathleen and I were involved with that. And we've gone through a couple iterations of it now from the original group that came together, and we've kind of reformed it as some folks have rotated off, brought it on, but it's been the same concept. These folks that really want to be part of innovation, they want to think about how can we do things differently, and they want to think critically about the technology and how we can use it to make the work that we do better.
This is another thing we've laughed about, Tony, because when Rod said, okay, go, here's your people, right? We thought that through, go govern, right? There was nothing to govern. It was a mess, right? So we had to spend a lot of time, months sort of doing the sort, putting the process in place, writing the charge, writing the guidance, talking to staff, sort of making the broader team aware of what we're doing and why they should care, right? So socializing the idea beyond this small group. And so, it was a little frustrating initially because we were so hungry to get started and actually start doing things, but we really couldn't. So we had to spend months just putting the foundation together, which again, I think was really helpful in positioning us for where we are today. But, when you start something, people don't want that slow on ramp, right? They want to start at 90 miles an hour, right? And so we had to deal with that frustration, particularly with a leader who was very eager to get started and show results. But I think that time and that work is just going to be significant as we move forward.
I don't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing, but I think Kathleen and I probably tend to process much more than others do. But I think I'd rather start with more process, and then as we go through, we can loosen it up. But instead of going the opposite way. And I know that some of our colleagues who have started to utilize the process get frustrated by the process, but I think it's showing value, and so it'll be an evolving process. But there was a lot of, as Kathleen said, a lot of months where it took a lot of thoughtfulness of what this looks like and what are we trying to accomplish with it.
It's a massive listening tour a lot of times, letting everybody, letting everyone sit with it, let them vent, let them see where it goes, building that atmosphere for buy-in and how you get there.
And being honest with everyone to say, this is evolving. What we're doing now, we're trying to make it work. And, in reality, it might not work out the way we think, and that's okay.
Tony, I think you asked about the charge specifically, but we determined, Geoff and I think, again, another really smart thing we decided, and I'm not sure we made the decision for the right reasons, but I'm glad we did, that this group is not a decision-making body.
Right.
It's a review, it's a coordination, it's a recommending body, right? So we review requests, we make recommendations to our leadership team, and then it's up to the leadership team to make the decision. Of course, we're informing that decision by our review and the knowledge that we have. But we did not want to put any of the team members in a place that we were telling a colleague, no, you can't purchase that new wonderful system that's going to change the world, right? We will make a recommendation. We'll help you analyze. We'll assist in the due diligence that needs to be done. We will make a recommendation, but ultimately it's up to the leadership team to make the decisions about investment in new products and resources, not ours.
How did you run this? Like, is it an ongoing body? Did you all just meet once a month no matter what? Because you talked about not only reviewing or asking those types of great questions for groups, but also then looking innovative, like what's happening in the sector. Yeah. What's your process like?
We set up standard quarterly meetings, and we have kind of a running agenda of things that we want to try to accomplish each quarter. Review internal platforms, look at the external landscape, those sorts of things. But then as these opportunities come up, we've set up the process that will be much more responsive. So usually within, 3 to 5 business days, we can at least have an initial review of the request and be able to try to set up some time within a week or two so that we can be more responsive to the requests that are coming in. So there is a little bit of ebb and flow to it as well, an ad hoc nature to it. But we also have those kind of standing quarterly meetings where we as a group can then think about more of the bigger strategy around what we're trying to accomplish.
We also have subcommittees of the Digital Governance Council. One focuses specifically on technology and sort of the digital landscape, what's out there, what are people doing, what's exciting, what should we be thinking about applying to our work, even if it's not in the higher education sector. We have one group that's looking at performance, right?
Performance and evaluation. We have a new group that's our owners and champions user group. And we can probably get into kind of, what that looks like, because we realized, we needed to have an executive sponsor, but then we needed to know who the owner and the champions were. And so we're, creating a group around that.
And then one on security and implementation, right? Just making sure that as we procure and implement, we are doing that work in the right way, right? We're adhering to university policy, our data secure, we're not transferring data in inappropriate ways. So we've got a group that looks at that as well. So it's a pretty robust, I think, cycle of roles and responsibilities that enable us to look at this and implement in a pretty sophisticated way.
And it also allows for a lot more involvement across the division. It's not just, the 6 or 8 of us at the Digital Governance Committee, it's all these other subcommittees. And while we're certainly represented on each of those subgroups, it really does pull in a lot more people. So again, it just helps to ensure that this digital first mindset that we're trying to adopt is not just being driven by 6 people.
Yeah, that's important. Hope everyone listening heard that. I'm curious how do requests come in? Somebody wants to do something.
Yeah, so we actually have a stack form. It's actually 2 parts because, again, process. So if someone has an idea or a platform, they'll fill out kind of the initial form for us to say, this is what it is. This is how we see it fitting within the larger divisional goals and objectives, and how it will help support us. And then we'll have a chance to be able to say, okay, that makes sense. Go forward, do more of the implementation planning, get with IT and have them do some due diligence, think about adoption, think about communication, both internal and external. I mean, it's a pretty robust requirement after that. But we split it into 2 because we didn't want everyone to go through all that detail. And then for it to come to us and say, well, what is this and why are you even thinking about this? This doesn't make sense at all. So having that first initial, got it, how can we help? This makes sense. And it's worked to our benefit as well, because we had one colleague come with a big platform, big ticket item, and we kind of went, this doesn't seem to fit. This is, you're missing a lot of pieces here. And when we kind of pushed back and she started to work through all the rest of it, it became very clear that, what we were asking was not what she wanted to do. And so it was, it allowed us to really say, okay, well, if you're not, if we're not going to set up the platform for success right from the beginning, then why are we moving forward with it?
And then I'm curious too, with your group, this is the Digital Governance Committee. Do you, and you talked about, 70 plus systems, all the different pieces out there. Does your team maintain like the master list of, okay. And that then plays into the owners and champions side. So then you would actually, for governance sake, know who actually is the owner of a system in case there's a question.
In theory.
And then work with those owners and champions to annually assess performance against the established objectives, right? We didn't have them when we started, so we created them for each platform. We know what we're trying to achieve, and then annually assess against that. Are we achieving it or not? Do we need to tweak our strategy? Do we need to do something different to optimize the solutions? We also track renewal, contract renewal dates, so that we're not auto renewing because we missed something. That never would have happened, but
Never.
it will never happen now, right? Because we have a better handle on all of that. So so we are doing all of that within this group as well.
But that was a real exercise as well, just, unraveling all of that, because there were small platforms that were on auto renew on someone's credit card. And it took some work to figure out who has this, where's it being paid, and to be able to, finally say, okay, now we understand, what the system looks like. And again, maybe it's overkill because you do have, Adobe suites on there. But I think it's important just to be able to say, and especially for Kathleen and her team, the IT team and app support team, to say, look at all of the platforms that we are maintaining and involved in maintaining in some way, shape, or form. And so when you come to me and say, well, why can't you just do that? Add one more thing. Well, look at what we're doing already. So I think it's given everyone a greater appreciation for, it's not just 3 or 4 things that everyone thinks about. It's much more comprehensive.
It's always big like that. And I hope everyone listening to this goes back to you're not alone. The story they're telling here about finding the different technologies, figuring out the renewals and the contracts, like it's everywhere out there. So don't feel bad if you are in that place. Just know that there is a way to move forward and put the work in and get there. I've talked to a lot of people and they've come and they want to get off a contract and then they're already so late that they don't even have time. Even it's ahead of the renewal, but not far enough in advance that they could get off the contract, and they get stuck then for another 2 years and something. Yeah. And
that's the worst thing, I think, particularly in the technology space, because it's advancing so much and new options are coming onto the marketplace. So we really don't want to be locked into anything over the long term that would prevent us from pivoting and capitalizing on other options.
Yeah, but then to the point and all the work you did, and if you don't know, you just don't know. So then you're like, oh crap, now we're stuck again.
Whoops.
I'm going to read. So you had in your presentation, you laid out 9 goals for your roadmap when you all were starting, and I'm going to read them quick for the audience and then pause at the end if you want to dive in on any of those, because then I do want to get into your lessons learned as well, so everyone can really relate to you and hear what happened there. But so the goals were, increase digital competency and curiosity of our staff. We've said curiosity several times now. Sure. I'm also a huge fan of that for moving things forward. Gain access to and connect siloed data and information enterprise-wide. I could clap again on that one. Identify and establish key technical platforms to underpin digital transformation. Promote and enforce the adoption of digital standards and guidelines across all UA units. Clap again. I think I just love all these. I'm clapping up here in my mind when I say all of these. Re-envision the alumni donor journey for the digital age. Align divisional objectives and decision-making for a digital future. Establish greater collaboration across units on digital transformation initiatives. Establish enterprise-wide data integrity and maintenance standards. And strive to be forward-thinking with a focus on digital innovation. So I think I hit all of them there. How, as you set those goals, was that the team and the governance committee that put that together? And then were you also sort of, as that talking and listening tour, were you putting those back out there and helping people understand even like what some of those goals might have meant?
When we first started this conversation, as I had mentioned earlier, during the pandemic, we spent several weeks learning. What we recognized when we first came together is that we all defined digital transformation, digital strategy differently, right? You had mentioned that, right? Many people think of it as a marketing strategy. So we immersed ourselves in best practices. We did a couple of book readings together that talked about strategies and applying technology to business solutions. And then we talked to peers that are in the marketplace, which, by the way, there's not a lot that really have formal roadmaps that they're using to sort of emulate, right? So we've talked to people that were further ahead than we were, but certainly there's not dozens and dozens of people to model a program against. And we kind of aggregated all of that and then thought about where we were and where we wanted to go and drove these goals to speak to those, right? Recognize where we are, be considerate of that and the realities of that situation, but then to also put that forward thinking mindset on it to make sure that we were driving and changing and evolving over time, right? We didn't want to be steady state. So we really tried to create a list of goals that would pivot and drive our growth and advancement over the long run.
We were also in a fortunate position, Kathleen, that in the midst of all this, we had initially started a CRM RFP. The pandemic hit, it got pulled, and during that interim period, the concept of a more enterprise-wide solution took hold on campus. And so we were suddenly then thinking about this transformation is much more than just what's happening within university advancement. It's also what's happening within the university. And how do we make sure that the work that we're doing is supporting and a part of this larger conversation? So, that certainly gets identified throughout our roadmap where we're talking more about enterprise-wide. That's where it starts to come in when we're talking about data and what are the opportunities to get data from across campus that we might not have always had access to, or at least in the same way, because now everyone is having this conversation together, how we can be supportive and use data in a different way. So that was, I think, a really critical part of this conversation that really allowed us to think much more broadly than what we had initially even started our conversation with.
And think bigger in many ways, right? When it's
absolutely
a unit within a bigger organization, you're limited by resource, technical capacity, right? Knowledge, time. But when you're aggregating all of that from an enterprise perspective, it allows you to think about things in a much more robust and grand way. It also comes with a cost, right? There's a time element. I mean, it takes a lot longer to do business that way, right? So I've had to be a lot more patient than I like to be, right? Because I still don't have that CRM that Geoff mentioned, because we've been on this journey with our partners across the campus. And at the end of the day, we will have a better solution for the university. But boy, it's just hard to be patient when you really feel like you need something yesterday and you still don't have it.
And it's also working with partners across campus. I had one of our colleagues that popped into my office yesterday and said, "Oh, the VP that I work with was asking about some data and why they have it and they haven't shared it with us." And I said, "Well, part of it is because we've asked for it and we've just not been able to get it, and there's other circumstances around it, and but suddenly everyone, because they're realizing, oh, this is part of a larger conversation, this all supports one another and the work that we're trying to do. Suddenly what used to be behind walls that we couldn't get to for various reasons is now part of, well, of course we're going to do this because this helps all of us, and that's really exciting as well.
Sure. Earlier on, we talked about socializing these ideas and concepts and getting feedback and input from other stakeholders. And so that was also part of our process, Tony. So we came up with a list, a draft, we vetted it, we iterated with our team, and then we also brought it back again to the larger division and got feedback from them, because again, without that buy-in and belief that it's reasonable and possible to achieve these things and the ability to see yourself in these goals, we knew we wouldn't succeed. So we did a lot of that as well, socializing these ideas, getting more input from the broader division. And then ultimately, once we had the list of 9, we took it a step further, and we have a digital roadmap that's a standalone document, but we didn't think that was the right place to stop. So we blended all of these goals into our organizational plan. It's a standalone piece, but it's not, right? So now when you look at our divisional plan, you see digital as a thread throughout the whole plan, because it's not a standalone thing, right? It has to be part of the fabric of our organization and part of everything that we do. So we took it that next step as well to make sure that it was part of the division, part of everyone's responsibility. We did add to each person's program digital or technology proficiency, something along that line. So everybody has that in their performance program now, that it's an expectation. We hire for that now. We test technical competency in our interviews. So it is definitely part of the fabric, if you will, and we try to infuse this in all of the conversations that we're having.
And you were asking about decision making. We had this recently. If we're going to be hiring positions, what's the digital component that we could be looking at? We're looking at hiring some positions for digital gift officers that we probably wouldn't necessarily have moved forward as quickly as we did, but we realized we're looking for some gift officers. We've got this digital component. It fits a couple different buckets that way. And so it's allowed us to really say, here's an innovative way that we can adopt digital and still be able to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish with gift officers. And that's, I think, how some of that is happening then organically in the decision making.
So I took a few notes there too, just where you started from. Digital transformation is such a big term, and it means so many things to so many people randomly. I think it was almost 10 years ago when we started. We were starting with the words digital transformation, and it was like a lead balloon on every table we went to. And now we're sort of coming back around to it. But the thread I'm hearing, and hopefully the audiences too, is this is almost culture change as much as technology implementations is secondary to what you need to do as you're thinking about it.
We looked at digital transformation 3 ways: it's people, it's process, and it's infrastructure.
And we I'm sorry to overtalk you, Tony, but we have failed because we have not appreciated the important role that people play, right? We have purchased tools that we thought were spectacular. We implemented them. User adoption was low. We didn't invest the time to drive user adoption. We didn't invest the time to, increase the energy and enthusiasm and demonstrate the application and the value of those tools. And we just stopped them because nobody was using them. The outcomes were abysmal. The return on investment was non-existent. So even tools and technology that have such great application and potential value are not valuable at all if you don't have the people behind you in that adoption. So I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I and younger in my career, when I was in-house leading putting in new technologies, and I came up with this talk, and it was technology's easy, but people are hard. Like this, everything was failing because I couldn't get people to buy into the program work that I was doing. So it was.
I say on occasion that if it weren't for the people, I would love my job. Not often, because I love my job and I love my colleagues, but there are days, boy, when the people make it really challenging to do anything.
It's that realization of how hard change really is.
Yeah.
And it's difficult. And that was part of the reason we started the company. It was we used to write it. We've seen impeccable technology delivery completely muted because no one understood why it was implemented, what they were supposed to do with it, what it meant for their job, and like money just going down the drain for that, and flawless design. Nobody liked it. Stuff is important, y'all. So, and the patience thing, it was interesting too. And you needing patience. I had two questions for you that could roll into the next one too. But I wonder how much the patience part, a lot of times with technology, is we're so used to things being so fast that we forget what it takes to get to the implementation and the purchase and the buy-in and all these other pieces we talked about. But curious too, just, as y'all were wrapping, or you put that first layer of the roadmap together, did you go back and prioritize segments? So per what you're saying there, Kathleen, you don't have the CRM yet. Was something else prioritized above that? Is the CRM still on there? So you're like, I know it's coming. It's just not there yet.
For sure.
How did that happen? Yeah, how the prioritization?
Yeah, and Geoff may want to speak to this, but part of our plan was devised in that way right from the beginning. We have timelines associated with each of our goals and objectives, so that we were thoughtful about, okay, this comes first, this is a later, endeavor. We have to keep, and this is one that's in the future. We have to keep our eye on it, but we just can't, right? CRM is a good one. But I also would say that we often with implementations of any product, there's phase 0 work, there's groundwork that needs to be done to make that implementation run smoothly. So we've also spent a lot of our time preparing for that CRM, as an example. So yes, it was delayed, but we've capitalized on that time to make the implementation smoother. So maybe the implementation will take less time because we put more effort into data cleansing and workflows and fixing some of the quirky things that we were living with but just won't work when you implement a new system. And we don't often have that time to invest in that kind of thoughtful preparation. So again, I'm trying to look at it as a gift of time and to prepare the team to actually have a more successful implementation when that clock starts, when that timeline starts. So a lot of it is how you perceive the project as well, and making the most of the situations that are put your way. I try to make lemonade with the lemons that I'm thrown rather than just stack them up in the corner and get overwhelmed by them. And I think this is an example of when we did that.
And I think it depends on the complexity as well. I mean, long term, we know culture change and working with our colleagues around an enterprise-wide, implementation solution is not a 6-month project, right? That's going to obviously be a longer term. But we also looked at, what are those short-term wins that we can start to see immediate results within a couple months. And so as we went through all those strategies, there were clear delineations between things that were just going to take longer because just by the nature they were complex versus, how can we get some quick things up and running. And then the rest of it, we were able to just kind of sort through. And frankly, it was a staff resource issue as well. As we look at these remaining things, where do we really want to, resource and prioritize versus other things? Again, not that other things weren't more important, but, there was kind of a natural decision that we were able to quickly go through to be able to say, this is short term, this is more midterm, and these are going to be longer term.
Two things that are popping up to me. One, the word data's come up several times now. So just for anyone listening, I think there is that other part where each one of these tools is housing data, and how that data talks to each other starts to become part of that roadmap infrastructure and process. Absolutely. Of where does this one flow to this one? How do we make it all work? Even if its system of record is different than another, but how can it all talk to each other? And then just the quick wins was really interesting too. Just making sure that you're keeping that momentum flowing because of the longer term things that are going to be happening. The staff resource too. I wonder, what I have found when we do this type of work, and maybe you were seeing it in yours too, is executives then can see, oh man, we don't even have the staff to do this, even though I thought it was they put it into your annual plan and told you it had to be done. And then you're like, well, hey, take a look at this. There's no one to do it. Have you found that to sort of hold true when you sort of look at the staff resourcing behind those initiatives?
For sure. And
I see smiles here. So
with the CRM in particular, it's on our mind. I think the challenge there, Tony, is again, going back to what we were talking about earlier on, is in a resource constrained environment, you kind of have to live with some of that. It's not like I can say I need another person to do X, Y, and Z, and the resources are there to give me that person. So we've had to really, I think, take a leap of faith, implement with the confidence that when we absolutely need to hire, the resources will be there, right? So either through attrition and reprioritizing how we're using our existing dollars, or by making a case to the university for additional investment. Because the reality is when you start, you often don't know the magnitude of the staffing matter or the scope of a work effort. And so I think time allows greater clarity and then creates a stronger case for additional investment. So we've approached it more from that perspective than assuming the resources are going to be there from day one.
I mean, I'd have to imagine with that move you all made in the beginning of having HR within the digital governance committee, that's got to help a little bit. So they're not, it's not out of the blue for them when you're asking.
Right, absolutely. And budget as well, right? It's part of their thinking as well. And knowing that we need to be really, really thoughtful about how we're spending our dollars and trying to implement other cost saving measures whenever possible so that we can liberate existing resources to invest in the future, right? So everybody has a role to play in this. Again, we've said this already. It's not just an IT strategy. It's not an IT responsibility. Everybody has to play their part to ensure that we have everything that we need to succeed.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So let's, if we could, just for the audience listening, I mean, lessons learned. I mean, you had a bevy of those listed, but I don't know if you just want to start talking to them, things that you've taken to heart and are taken away and that you could share with everyone listening who's thinking about taking on this effort themselves.
Yeah, you started the conversation with, that digital strategy is not a digital communication strategy. So I'm going to take that one off the table, although Kathleen and I both love that one. I think one of the lessons that I really have learned through all of this, and I think Kathleen would agree with me, is that it's the concept of it's a destination, and it's not a destination but a journey. And I think that's really hard for a lot of us, right? Because especially those of us who work in fundraising, it's a very metrics driven. We know what our goal is. We know what success is because we've either hit the number, we haven't hit the number. And when you're talking about something like this, as we've talked about, it's culture change, and that is going to evolve naturally over time. And so that mindset of, we have this vision, and that was part of that process that we put together early on with the Digital Governance Committee, because we were going through, and all of a sudden, Kathleen and I kind of stepped back and went, well, what does any of this even mean? Where are we going? And not even have that, truly a defined, what is our digital vision for for our vision for the division. Once we had that, everything's kind of started to fall into place. But realizing again, it's not a destination. We're never going to get to that vision because the landscape is always going to change. But it's the foundation and the functions and the structure that we put into place that can take advantage of that changing landscape.
Yeah, I said this already. I'm just going to repeat it, but I'll pick a different one. It's not the responsibility of IT, right? It has to be broader. Everybody in the organization has to play a role. But what I really like as well, Tony, is that we have to be nimble, right? We have to be constantly scanning, and we have to have an awareness about what's going on around us. We can't just build the plan and then work the plan and think we're done. So that's hard for a lot of people too, right? But one of those lessons learned is that we're never going to be done. We're going to have to constantly scan. We're going to have to constantly change and evolve and adapt, and don't get too comfortable with any one solution because you're probably not going to have it a year from now, 2 years from now, right? Something new is going to take its place. And that's a hard lesson to live, right?
Especially for people who have seen a lot of change and they just want to say, we have to stop,
Enough.
right? Enough.
Yes.
We just need to live with this. It's a hard thing to get people to understand. No, this is kind of the new paradigm and we have to become comfortable with that. I would agree.
Change fatigue within our work lives and
It's
inside of a change
very
fatigue in society, right? I mean, it's just exhausting everywhere these days. And then, but it's it's interesting too. I mean, the technologies will change, but just thinking about the policies too for fundraising work. What data can you capture on somebody? Where can it be stored? What is the security behind that? What are the laws on that now? Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another one of my favorite ones is if you build it, they don't necessarily come, right? Field of Dreams play there. But we had an example. I said this before. We launched a new technology that was AI driven, and we really saw great potential for increasing our gift officer productivity, right? The premise was that the next best prospect would be identified for them. So they didn't have to scour through lists of names and figure out who to call. No one used it. So we stopped using it, right? We don't have that technology anymore. And we learned really the hard way, I think, that you have to have that product champion who can get people excited about it and demonstrate success, show case studies for using it, right? Spark the imagination, if you will, because without that, even the best technology doesn't do anything for an organization. So that's probably one of my favorite lessons learned, is that you really have to put the time and effort and have those champions and keep saying things after you think you've said them way too many times, because you don't know if everyone has heard you yet.
And I think it's also about making strategic and deliberate choices. It's not just the most exciting, newest thing on the market that the salesman has pitched you. We really have to think about, what are we trying to accomplish and what's going to be the best solution generically to help us do that.
So I went to film school as an undergrad, and I remember when they were talking to us about putting together a film, or when you edit and when you make it, you're making a choice. The world might not like it, but at least you know why you did it, and then you can adapt. And I feel like what you're saying here too, it's not a destination, it's the journey, and then the ability to stay nimble. A lot of people will think process can hinder that. I find process helps it, because if you don't know where you're supposed to be, you can't evolve, and then you actually don't know when you're being nimble or you're just scrambling.
Right. And there is a difference. And we were doing a lot of scrambling before reacting, right? And we're trying to get out of the reactive mode and drive our group to be proactive and thoughtful about the decisions we're making, not just appease the colleague who, as I think I said this already, who has found a new solution that they really want to implement because it's great and they're really excited about it. It doesn't negate the value of the tool, but we need to be more thoughtful about our procurement decisions, and we can't just go with emotion, right?
It's like we're all just growing up from the disruption is cool. It's not. It's disruptive.
Right.
You have to have plans, and people need to work, and then you need to think about how you can evolve a little bit forward.
Right.
Well, I have greatly appreciated this conversation. I have been very excited and looking forward to this for quite a while since I saw your amazing presentation at AASP. I am so glad we met. And thank you for joining us today. I hope our audience got a lot out of this. And for anyone who's a regular listener of the show, we have started a Spotify channel, and we do end every episode by asking our guests the same question. And Kathleen, I'll start with you. What is your go-to song when you need a boost, and why?
Yeah, this was a tough one for me, because I don't have a go-to song. I would say I have a go-to type of music. Okay. I do like country pop kind of music, and I like it loud and with that strong, solid beat. But if I had to pick an album, that was the closest I could get to it, and this isn't even country. I love The Greatest Showman. I don't know if you've heard it, but love the music in that, and I turn it up. It just empowers me and gives me the energy that I need to tackle whatever I'm doing. So I often have that on the weekends when I'm cleaning the house, because it's not one of my favorite things to do, and it gives me the energy I need to enjoy what I'm doing.
Well, thank you for sharing. I am very
Yeah.
familiar. My wife is in the performing arts, and my daughter's following her footsteps, and that is one of their
Oh,
favorite albums as well.
yeah, it's great.
All right. Now over to you, Geoff.
So I'm kind of in a similar answer as Kathleen when I saw it, it's like, gosh, I'm not sure if I could pick one song. When I really want to get into a groove, and I'm in particular when I'm like, getting into data, because I'm a data guy and I just, it just feed off of that. And I just really want to get into that groove. I love this little radio station out of New Orleans, WWOZ, and I'll stream it, and it's like, the traditional New Orleans music. It's the Cajun Creole brass band, and I'll put that on, and like Kathleen, probably am turning it up a little louder than what I should in the office. But that music, it's just energizing, and it's great, and it's just it just really kind of helps me get in the right mind, and I can really then dive deep into things. It's fun.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
You're very welcome.
We will pick a few songs probably from a WWOZ genre to put on Spotify channel, and a couple from the album. Appreciate your time today. For anyone who was listening, if you got some feedback on this episode, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you all again. This was wonderful.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank
It's great. We
fun.
love talking about this, so it was a great opportunity. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. And dear audience, thank you for listening, and I will see you next time. Well, I'll hear from you next time. Bye, y'all.